You typed out the message, then deleted it, then typed it again. Not because you didn't know what you wanted to say, but because you were trying to make it sound okay to them first. You spent maybe 4 minutes on 3 sentences. Rewording, softening, reading it back through their eyes before it ever reached them. And when you finally sent it, you sat there waiting. Not for their reply, but for a signal that they weren't upset, that you hadn't disturbed the peace, that everything was still fine between you. This is not about that message. You know that. It's about the pattern behind the message. The way you've been moving through your life with one eye always on the room, checking, adjusting, quietly editing who you are before anyone can object. You've been doing it so long you've forgotten there was ever a version of you that didn't. There's a word for what that costs you. Not in money, not in visible effort, in something quieter, in the slow draining of direction that happens when you spend your energy managing other people's impressions of you instead of building the life that actually belongs to you. The Stoics had a name for the territory you can control and the territory you can't. And the exhausting part, the part they came back to again and again, wasn't pain. It wasn't failure. It was the particular kind of suffering that comes from pouring yourself into the wrong column. This is about what happens when you stop. There's a kind of weight you carry that doesn't show up on any scan. It doesn't make you visibly sick. It doesn't give you a reason to call in and take a day off. It just sits there. Behind the meetings, behind the dinner time conversation, behind the text threads and the casual run-ins. Behind the moments where someone looks at you a certain way and you feel the machinery inside you start up. Calibrating, adjusting, preparing. You've been at that dinner table, technically present, but not there at all. Your body is passing the bread. Your voice is saying the right things, but your mind is already 2 moves ahead, anticipating what they might think of the thing you said last Tuesday, rehearsing a softer version of what you actually believe in, case the topic comes up. Nobody notices. That's part of what makes it so heavy. There's no relief from it, because there's no moment when anyone acknowledges it's happening. It is completely invisible labor, and you've been doing it in every room, with nearly every person, in nearly every conversation where something mattered to you. What makes this particularly difficult to see is that it doesn't look like a problem from the outside. It looks like consideration. It looks like being thoughtful, diplomatic, mature. The kind of thing you'd call a strength in a job interview. And in small doses, in the right moments, it can be exactly that. But you know when it crossed a line. Not in a way you'd say out loud. But somewhere quieter than that, the honest version of you already knows. The version that doesn't need to be acceptable to anyone. And that version knows something got reversed somewhere. That you stopped adjusting your behavior when it mattered and started adjusting yourself when it didn't. There's a specific kind of exhaustion that comes with this. Not the good kind, not the tired you feel after finishing something hard. This is the tired that accumulates from a day where you worked hard, handled your responsibilities, did what was asked of you, and still feel somehow emptied. Like something was used that you didn't consent to using. Like the day was full, but you weren't in it. That feeling has a source, and the source isn't your job, or your schedule, or even the people around you. The source is the constant, low-grade labor of translating yourself before you sibwas and speak, of pre-processing every thought through the filter of how it will be received, of living, essentially, from the outside in. Starting with their anticipated response and working backward to figure out who you're allowed to be in this moment. You didn't choose to build this habit. It built itself around conditions that made it useful. And for a long time, it was useful. You learned to read people, to navigate rooms, to keep the peace in spaces that needed peace kept. That's not nothing. There's real skill in that. But skill and identity are different things. And at some point, the skill became the structure you lived inside. Marcus Aurelius was not a quiet person with a quiet life. He was the most powerful man in the known world. And he was surrounded every single day by people with opinions about what he should do, how he should lead, what kind of emperor he ought to be. Senators, generals, philosophers, critics who never had to make the decisions he made. And yet in the private pages he kept for no one but himself, he came back to one idea with a steadiness that still feels almost unreasonable. He wrote that a person who depends on the approval of others for their peace will never be at peace, because the approval of others isn't something you can fully possess. You can earn it in the morning and lose it by noon. You can build it for years and watch it collapse on a misunderstanding. It lives outside you, and anything that lives outside you can be taken. What he was protecting wasn't his reputation. He was protecting something smaller and more essential: his ability to act from his own judgment, to make a choice and mean it, to be the same person whether anyone was watching or not. You've had glimpses of that. You know what it feels like when you say something and you don't immediately scan the room to see how it landed. When you make a decision and you don't rehearse the explanation you'd give if someone asked. Those moments feel different from the others. Lighter. Not reckless, lighter. Like you're moving from somewhere solid instead of somewhere that shifts every time someone changes their expression. The question isn't whether you care about others. You do. That's not what's being argued here. The question is what's happening in the space between caring and performing. Because those are not the same thing, even though they can look identical from the outside. Caring means you consider the impact of your actions on the people around you. Performing means you shape yourself in advance to avoid their discomfort, their judgment, their disappointment, before any of it has even happened. Caring flows outward. Performing flows backward. It starts with their imagined reaction and works its way back to editing who you are before you even open your mouth. Epictetus grew up with nothing. He was born into slavery in the 1st century, which meant he had no say over his name, his labor, his location, his body. The Romans owned all of that. By every external measure, he had less freedom than almost anyone alive. And yet, there's a line from his teaching that people who've read it tend to carry around for years. Not because it's dramatic, but because of how quietly it cuts. He said, "Some things are within our power, and some things are not." What is within our power? Our judgments, our desires, our choices, our response to what happens. What is not? Our body, our reputation, our position, our property, everything someone else could theoretically take. He wasn't teaching resignation. He was teaching precision. He was pointing at a very specific place inside you where no one else can operate without your permission. Your own assessment of who you are and what matters. And he was saying, stop leaking energy out of that place. Stop handing your inner life over to the fluctuating opinions of people who are also, by the way, just trying to manage their own. You've given a lot to the management project, more than you've accounted for. Think about the things that didn't happen because the cost of explaining them felt too high. The creative work you didn't start because you weren't sure how it would be received. The boundary you didn't draw because drawing it would have required a conversation you weren't ready to have. The version of yourself you kept private because you weren't certain yet that it was safe to show. That's not caution. That's the approval mechanism running the show. And it's running it quietly, which is the problem. Because unlike procrastination, which at least announces itself, this pattern doesn't feel like avoidance while it's happening. It feels like wisdom. It feels like reading the room. It feels like choosing your battles. And those things are real. The Stoics valued discernment. They valued knowing which hills to stand on and which to let pass. But there's a difference between strategic silence and structural silence. Strategic silence is a choice you make in a specific moment for a specific reason. Structural silence is what happens when silence has become your default, because speaking costs you something you're no longer willing to spend. When speaking costs you their approval. Seneca spent a significant part of his life in positions of enormous public visibility. Advisor to emperors, playwright, philosopher, he was read, watched, critiqued, envied, and at various points genuinely endangered by the opinions of powerful people. He understood the machinery of reputation better than almost anyone in his era, and he wrote, toward the end of his life, about retreating into yourself, not hiding, not withdrawing from responsibility or relationship, retreating into the place inside you that can see clearly, the place that isn't rattled every time someone changes their assessment of you. He wasn't prescribing selfishness. He was prescribing self-knowledge. He understood something easy to lose in a world built on visibility. A person with no internal ground to stand on will spend all their energy trying to borrow it from other people's good opinion. And borrowed ground is unstable. It shifts whenever they shift. The internal ground he was pointing to isn't complicated to describe. It's just difficult to return to when you've been away from it for a long time. It's the simple, quiet certainty of knowing what you actually think. Not what you should think. Not what would be safe to think. What you actually think when you drop the performance and let yourself go somewhere honest for a moment. You've been there. Less often than you'd like, but you've been there. Usually late at night, or alone somewhere, or in a conversation with one of the few people in your life you don't perform for. And in those moments, something releases. The machinery goes quiet. You're not scanning. You're not calibrating. You're just present in what you actually believe. And it feels like coming back to something that was always there, waiting. You know what that feels like. The difference between being in a room and actually being in it. The shift doesn't happen in a dramatic moment. That's the thing no one tells you about this kind of change. There's no revelation. There's no clean break. There's no morning where you wake up free of the pattern that took years to build. The shift happens in ordinary, small, specific moments, and it looks almost unremarkable when it does. It looks like this. Someone asks you something, and for once you say what you actually think without qualifying it. Not aggressively, not with fanfare. You just say it, plainly, and you don't immediately look for signs that it was received well. It looks like leaving a conversation that was draining you without constructing an exit story that protects everyone's feelings, including the feeling of the conversation itself. It looks like making a decision and not rehearsing the defense you'd give if someone asked you to justify it. These moments are tiny. They feel almost too small to count. But something is being built in them. Something that wasn't there before, or that was there once, and got quietly dismantled by years of trying to be acceptable in too many directions at once. Marcus Aurelius had a phrase he returned to in his private writing. He wrote about acting according to nature. He meant acting in alignment with reason, with your own considered judgment, with the best of what you actually are, rather than the version you've curated for external consumption. He was reminding himself, He had to remind himself constantly, because even for him, even with all the philosophical training, the pressure to perform was real. To be the emperor people needed, to be legible, to be safe. But in those private pages, when no one was watching, he kept pulling himself back to the same thing. Be what you actually are. Do what you actually believe is right. And let the opinions form wherever they form. There's a compassionate reading of the pattern you've been in, because it didn't come from nowhere. At some point, probably when you were young enough that you didn't have many other options, reading the room and adjusting accordingly was actually useful. Maybe it was necessary. You were navigating spaces that weren't always safe, with people who weren't always consistent, and you found that tuning yourself to their signals made things smoother. That worked. For a while. The problem is that the strategy outlived the situation. The room changed, but the habit stayed. And now you're in spaces where you actually do have options, where you're actually safe, where the people around you are capable of receiving who you genuinely are. And you're still running the old software, still translating yourself before you speak, still checking before you choose, still editing the version of yourself that gets to walk into each room. You don't need that software anymore, not at the level you've been running it. This isn't about becoming someone who doesn't care. The caring is part of what makes you capable of real connection, real contribution, real lessons in the lives of people who matter to you. What you're releasing is something different. The compulsive part, the automatic part, the part that runs before you even consciously decide to let it run. You're releasing the belief that your inner peace has to be earned from other people's responses to you. Because it doesn't. It never did. That was always a miscalculation, an understandable one, but a miscalculation. Your sense of yourself can't be sustained from the outside in. It has to be built from the inside out, slowly, through the accumulation of small moments where you acted from your own judgment and didn't immediately need someone to confirm that you were right to do so. That accumulation is what the Stoics called character. Not a trait you're born with, not something you arrive at through insight alone. Character, in the Stoic sense, is what forms when you repeatedly choose your own considered judgment over the pull of whatever would make you most immediately acceptable. It forms quietly. It forms in private. It forms in the moments that seem too small to matter until you look back and realize they were the only moments that ever did. And here is what that starts to look like in practice. Not in theory, in the actual texture of your days. You stop needing every interaction to end with confirmation. You say what you mean in the morning meeting, and you don't spend the afternoon replaying how it sounded. You disagree with someone you respect, and you don't immediately soften it into a shape they'll be more comfortable holding. You make a choice you can't fully explain, and you let it stand without a footnote. None of this requires you to become indifferent. You can still be warm. You can still be generous. You can still show up with full attention for the people in your life. But there's a different quality to that presence now, because you're actually present, not managing, not calculating, not running 3 steps ahead of the conversation to make sure it ends somewhere safe. Just there, listening from a place that isn't braced. That's what the Stoics were pointing at when they wrote about freedom. Not the freedom to do anything you want. Not freedom from difficulty or disappointment or the complexity of being in relationship with other people. The freedom to be in any given moment, a person oriented inward toward their own values, their own judgment, their own quiet sense of what's right, rather than permanently oriented outward toward the imagined verdict of whoever happens to be in the room. That kind of freedom doesn't shout. It doesn't announce itself. It settles, slowly, over a life that has stopped needing the room's permission to exist. There will be a moment soon. Not symbolic, not dramatic. Just an ordinary moment in your actual life. Someone will look at you in a certain way, or say something that lands with a familiar weight. Or you'll feel the old machinery start up in your chest, the readying, the bracing, the beginning of the performance you've given 1,000 times. And in that moment, you won't need to do anything complicated. You won't need a new strategy. You won't need to have figured everything out. You won't need the perfect words, or the right mood, or some finally settled version of yourself that's ready to stop caring what people think. You'll just need to notice the pull, and not follow it. That's a small thing. It doesn't feel small the first time you do it. The first time you stay with your own ground when everything in you is trained to move toward theirs, it's quiet and strange and nothing dramatic happens. No one congratulates you. No camera catches the moment. The room goes on around you exactly as it was. But something else happens. Something internal. Something that the machinery, all these years, has been keeping you too busy to feel. You come back to yourself. Not a new self. Not a better self that showed up because you finally did it right. Just yourself. The one that was always there, waiting underneath all the adjustments. And from there, the next thing you do will come from somewhere real. That's all it ever had to be.